Hi, welcome to season 3, yet another segment of the Digital Rights Africa podcast, where we discuss everything data protection and privacy, cybersecurity, child online protection, intellectual property, and data governance issues across Africa. And I'm your host, Teki Akuetteh. Today, I have been joined by two gentlemen from the US that work and practice in the US, and I would like them to introduce themselves.
Matthew Martin, founder of Two Candlesticks. We're a cybersecurity consulting firm. We work a lot with developing countries, small, medium-sized companies, startups, just trying to help where we can. I've spent the last 16 years before this doing Fortune 500 financial services in the U.S.
Thank you, Martin.
James Baako, thank you for having me. CEO of Kairos Vision Consult. We consult for businesses on cybersecurity. We do network security, application security, GRC, and then we also train students or people that want to go into cybersecurity.
So I'm really excited to get you here. I don't think we've had anybody from the US on our podcast yet. And so one of the things that I would love us to do today is to do a bit of comparison, right? How is Africa doing, particularly in your space? And I would like you to give us a fair assessment, not the diplomatic one. So let me start with you, James, and then I'll come to Martin.
I would think we've started well. In terms of digitization, we've started. What I would like to see is to have a data lake where the entire nation will have a one data lake where we have all the government data flowing into. And so any government agency that wants to, have access to any type of data, they'll have a common source to go and then get that data. And then any private entity that is looking to get data in order to use, they can apply through a process and then get that data. And so they go through a process, they will be assessed, there will be a risk assessment. And the process will be to see whether they have the required controls in order to store that data. And once that is certain, they can then have that data to be used. As at what it stands right now, we don't have a common central data set. And that is where we should be getting to. And once we can get it, the economy will open up to the next level. And if government should do anything, I think that is where government should be focused on for now. And the reason is because once we can open up the world to Ghana, we have young men and women that can stay in their mother's basement and still develop softwares, sell it to the world, and not just be confined to the economy of Ghana.
Well, thank you. I will come back to you because my antennas are up on the rights and the protection bid and opening pipelines. But let me come to Martin. Where do you think we stand? You've been doing some work across Africa. You definitely work in the US. Where are we?
Yeah, so I think where I would come from, and I'm definitely not as much of an expert as James on this, but on Ghana specifically. But I think what I've noticed in my short time of working with various people in Ghana and just random conversations is, I think what I would like to see is more awareness of how to use the internet correctly, and it's not just for companies, but just people. Right. And so as internet connectivity starts to make its way throughout the country and more people are online every day, how to be safe and how to look out for, various things that are bad, whether it's extremists recruiting people online or it's just basic phishing attempts that you're going to get through emails. So to me, I'd love to see that sort of become more nationwide and more widespread. And then when you start to do that, then that starts to protect the companies, right? Because then they bring that back into their companies as they start to learn how to do it themselves personally.
Yeah, I think that's great. But you're all touching on some interesting areas. And I want to poke a bit further, the big bear in the room. So US, you live and you work mainly also in the US. Are we not all, whether African countries or the US or the developed world, are we not all having the same challenges? So, in terms of connecting all the pipelines, what are the differences you see in the US as opposed to here? And then for you, Martin, in terms of training and awareness, the US is a very huge country with several states and all of that. And we also know that you have, your own challenges around the digital divide and all of that. So where does this sit,
Yeah, to start with, I think in the US, what makes the difference is regulations.
Okay.
There are regulations for every sector of technology, and in cybersecurity, to be specific. So when you go to the healthcare, for instance, we have HIPAA.
Yes.
All right, that regulates the industry. So, I mean, the companies are mandated to do certain things.
Okay.
All right, you do that, or you fall in the wrong hands of the law. And then when it comes to the government or the federal, companies, we have the FISMA law. So that is another aspect of regulation. And then when you go to the private companies or the publicly traded companies, we have Sarbanes-Oxley. So what makes the difference here between the US and here is regulations. And most of these regulations in the US are not government. So when you take something like PCI DSS, it is just the private card companies, the credit card companies that came together and decided that no, we don't have any regulation governing this industry. So they came together and then they came up with the DSIs, which is the regulations that should govern the industry. I hear people here talking about government, they kind of champion everything, which I understand. But the private sector can come together and start doing something as well.
Very well, but hold your thoughts. I'll come back to you, Martin. Yes. So your thoughts also around the what you had mentioned around the gaps, awareness, internet usage, and what you see in the US. What are the differences, and what you're hearing about here?
Yeah, so I think to start with, there's a lot more education around it in schools, like from a very young age. Like my kids are in fifth grade now in the U.S. They're 11. They've had their own iPad from school since they were in first grade, and so they've been learning how to interact and how to like what to put online, what not to, and like all that kind of stuff from a very young age. And so as they get older, it's just sort of second nature to look out for certain things. But I think it's also a lot more training in universities. You got people coming out with cybersecurity degrees and coming into the workforce, and Fortune 500 companies, 1,000 companies are able to snap up a lot of young talent. Whereas I see sort of all over Africa, you have a hard time getting that.
The mass of
Right.
I think that you're really, in as much as I'm itching to dig a bit further around some of what you raised around how the U.S. typically has regulated I'll call it the digital rights space, right, broadly from the sectorial perspective. Maybe you're biased because you come from the US, but maybe you're not. I have a different viewpoint that I'll share with you later. But do you think that the approach that the US has taken in dealing with digital rights issues, whether leaving it to the company, has worked? I mean, we've seen the conversations with Congress, we've seen the challenges, we've seen the general calls for a federal data privacy law. We've seen the passage of the Californian Privacy Act and a lot of other. Do you think the sectorial approach is the way to go? And especially with African countries where you don't have the resources that comes with development of legislations and the backing. Do you think that the sectorial approach is the best, or what we seem to be leaning more towards the European, which is more of a centralized model or approach to regulation? Do you think
So if you don't mind, let me.
Yes.
So, so I think there's two different things you're talking about, right? So I do not like the way the U.S. lets the states do their own thing. Right? I would much rather there be a federal either security or privacy regulation. I think it's a much better way to go. Because what happens is like if you're a company that works in all states, you have to pay so much money to your legal program just to make sure you're compliant with everything coming out all the time. Somebody's changing something, somebody's news coming out. So the burden on the company is huge. And so some of the Fortune 500s, like whatever, they make enough. But but when you start to get down to small businesses, it becomes prohibitive to even work in a certain state because now you have to do all these other things. So I'd much rather it be that way. The one thing I would say though is the U.S. and the EU. I like the centralization of the EU, but I don't like the way they do the regulations.
Yeah,
because they're very prescriptive versus like a principles approach that you would see like the US and UK are much more about the principles of how you do this, whereas the EU is like you're going to do A, B, C, D, and you're going to do it this way, right? And so what happens is a great example is the EU AI Act, right, which is going through right now. So it's very prescriptive in a way for something that we don't even understand how people are going to use it yet, right? We're still trying to figure that out. And most of that thing's not even going into place until 2026.
Yes.
So by the time you get there, it's probably going to be obsolete and you're going to have to do it all over again.
I generally don't have a preference for particularly laws targeted at technologies. I don't believe in very prescriptive legislations because it doesn't help. But
to come in here, I think the U.S. is even moving towards a more centralized system, like we have for the Europeans. The reason why we have different privacy laws for the U.S. is because the laws in U.S., each state has their laws.
Yes.
And so it's a little kind of difficult having a central, and that is why you have the California, you have and then you have the New York coming up with a cybersecurity law, because they couldn't just wait until we get to the point where we have a centralized law. So each state want to start doing something. Yeah. Because the system is kind of affecting them now, and things are moving ahead very quickly. And so each state decided to kind of start doing something. But I can assure you that even U.S. is moving towards a more centralized law. So if you ask me which is better or which should be adopted in Africa, the more centralized law will be much better to be adopted. But it should be flexible. You see, laws shouldn't be too stringent in order to kind of kill companies, but it should be a balance. And that is what cybersecurity is all about. As much as you want to protect systems, you want to make it much easier for users as well. You don't want to lock the users out, because if you overprotect the systems, then it's going to be hard for users to use whatever you are protecting.
I have a different opinion about that. I don't know about that. But if we need to protect, users, we need to protect them, right? I believe we shouldn't stifle innovation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're seeing whatever is happening recently in Beijing. There's been a decision around AI violating copyright laws and all of that. And there has to be a certain level of controls, because I always say that we live in a world of laws, right?
Yeah.
Without laws, everything becomes chaotic. So maybe, yes, there has to be a balance. I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
But I don't agree.
Right. The way I always say this, our job as security professionals is not to eliminate risk. This is the way I say it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Our job is to enable the business to maximize their profits in a safe way.
Yes.
I think that's where we in the digital rights space gets worried, right? Because, and I see this, it's good this is coming up, because I see this with a lot of US companies that sometimes we have worked with in the past and all of that, where they're looking at these issues from the strictly business perspective and maximization of profits, minimization of how would I say it? Yes,
Yeah, it's
minimizing
minimizing
Right.
risk,
the
right?
expenses
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
of that. And so isn't that the reason why then we need somebody to crack the whip?
No, it shouldn't. If I'm a coming here, it shouldn't necessarily be cracking the whip all the time. So in security, a couple of things we look at in making decision is the risk.
Yes.
We look at a risk ranking. So each
Okay.
country, for instance, has a risk ranking.
Risks, yeah.
So if
And then your risk tolerance.
yeah,
right?
the risk tolerance
You've
and
got,
the risk.
you've got to understand how much risk you want to live
Right.
with, which is where this comes in with
Right.
digital rights.
Absolutely.
You have to
Yeah.
understand how much
Right.
is okay versus what's not.
Right. So I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't just say that doing business outside the United States, doing business outside the United States is risky. So no U.S. business should do business out. I want to look at the risk ranking of that country.
Okay.
And is it low? Is
Okay.
it medium? Is it high? And that is how we make decision. So
Okay.
if the risk rating of that country is very high, then that would determine what should be the
Put in
measures to be
place.
put in place.
Okay.
If the risk level is low, then if the risk level is medium. So that is what I meant by saying
Okay,
it should be
okay, I
a
get it.
balance.
A
So
balance,
it shouldn't
okay.
be just straight to say, okay, these are the rules and everybody should just go by it. There should be a balance.
Okay.
And that is
That's
that.
why you don't have prescriptive.
Yes, and that is how we make
Because- right.
decisions as cybersecurity
Yes.
people.
Yeah.
And so in those policy developments, there should be people that understand the technology and also understand the policy
I
as well.
completely agree
Yeah.
with you on that. But let me come back, especially because you're talking about people who understand these issues. One of the biggest challenges that I think we have as a continent of Africa is that most of our capacity to address some of these things may not necessarily exist in the way in which, like comparing our embracing and use of these technologies with the kind of capacity that is required to enable us do the right assessments and appreciate these issues is non-existent. What you have worked across Africa, you all look at training and training related issues as well. What do you think is really accounting for a lot of these challenges, and how do you think we can overcome it?
If you wanna,
I'll go first. So this is one of the reasons why I founded this company.
Okay.
Was I wanted to make a difference in the world, to go out and try to raise the level. Hey, we talk a lot about in security. We talk about like a cyber poverty line, right? Which is like the line you need to have this level of security to get to be okay, right?
Yes.
It's sort of a minimum level. And so I look around the world, and there's so many places that are below that,
Yeah.
right? And so how can I help get people to that level? And one of the ways to do that is through training, awareness, education, all those sort of basic things. And so that's where.
Are they really basic? Let me.
Well,
I mean,
coming from the
that's a
US, yeah.
minimum. That's the foundation. So.
if you don't have that, there's no way you do everything else.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very foundational piece. So I think from a security perspective, it's absolutely basic. Like that's
So
something
it's
everybody should
necessary.
have.
We shouldn't be thinking about technologies without putting in place the necessary.
Well, right. So
trainings.
what I would say is like this: if you go find, let's say, some 30-year-old person in the jungle who's never been in a city before, and you hand them the keys to a car, you just gave them some great technology.
Yep.
Would you just hand them the keys and tell them to go drive through a car?
Yeah, experience
Yeah.
Like
and kill yourself.
right, right. But the point is, you wouldn't do that with that, right? So why would you do that with other technology, right? So,
But isn't that also because we really, as African countries, don't have a choice in this matter of
I don't know that I would say
technologies?
don't have a choice.
I would say that because it's essentially like we're shutting ourselves out, right? If you decide not to embrace these technologies.
Well, I think you can do both. I think you can embrace technology and embrace education. It involves a little bit of spending, and it involves bringing in partners. Right? It's one of the reasons why I'm here, is to try to find some partnerships to do this and be able to start educating the population. You start with the young people. You start bringing in, like high school age kids or early in college, and starting to train them so when they come out and enter the workforce, they have this sort of basic foundational level of security knowledge so they can come and help local companies. Then you got the other problem is you got to figure out how to hold on to them. right?
Yes.
So they don't take off to Europe
Right.
or Canada or US.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's how it has to start being built, and then you can start to build on top of it, and you can have that level that
I want to zero in. I love awareness. I love training, but it's expensive.
Absolutely. That was the point I was just
And
coming to.
so I just want you to address that.
That was the point I was
Yes.
just coming to. Cybersecurity education around the world is generally expensive. Even in the US, it's highly expensive. And so the point is, how do we make it cheaper? My organization, for instance, apart from what we do, we also trained people. And one of the things that we do is that people that are joining the training from Ghana, we make the cost very, 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 very low for them to be able to join. So provided you can prove that you are joining the class from a developing country, we make it very low for you. And that is what I will want other institutions like ISICA, ISC Score to also do, to be able to kind of understand that people from this part of the world do not have the same income level as we have in the US. It's surprising to see that an ASICA certification that costs about $750 in the US, people here will have to pay the same thing. So if we can do that very cheap for people here to kind of, because people are willing. I've been talking to people around
Yeah.
Wasakam, the young men and women are kind of willing. They want this knowledge. They want to
Yeah.
take these certifications, but it's pretty expensive for them. So if they can make it very, very much cheaper, or even give scholarships, that would be much more easy. In addition to that, if organizations can sponsor people that are willing to take this certification or to take this training, that would be much more helpful. Those are some of the things that
Wow,
we
I
should do.
would be rounding up maybe with a second each. And I would love to have gone further on this, but to just round it up, I will come to you first. What do you think? Because just appealing to these organizations, they're profit-making entities. And if somebody can pay, they don't care. If there are millions around the world, they really don't care about some African youth sitting out there, not saying they can afford because they have their markets already. So, what other efforts beyond appealing to for instance, certification providers, etc., should we be looking at? What roles could civil society play in that? What role could governments play? So just maybe a minute each, and then
Yeah. So what I would like to see is like to see the government make an investment in cybersecurity education through not only at a university level, but through primary schools and just basic safety on the internet, not focusing on like how to be cybersecurity professionals, but just being safe, and then build on that. And then you have partnerships with folks like us, and we especially like that.
Yeah.
and like partnering universities, like finding U.S. universities to partner with Ghanaian universities and try to build the education. To me, that would be the biggest impact that it could get in the short term.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think partnership is the way to go because there are organizations that are willing, something like my company and yours, for instance, we are willing to come down and then train. It might not be the money aspect of it, the knowledge transfer. And if the avenue is there for us to do that, maybe come down for 4 weeks or maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks and do a stretch program, that would be very helpful.
I think I'm going to take you up on that because one of the things we are supposed to be doing around at Africa Digital Rights Hub is also building capacity in the cybersecurity space. So I am going to hold you to that, and viewers just note it so that if they don't come, maybe you will hold.
I will say right now, I will be here. Let's do it.
Yes.
Let's
So
do it.
we can definitely explore and see what is going to come out of it. But all too soon, we've come to the end of another Digital Rights Africa podcast. And I just want to say a big thank you to my guests for joining us. And this is a conversation, as I said, that has not ended because I believe there would definitely definitely be a follow-up and some trainings that are going to come out of this. Please do well to follow us and subscribe to our page for the next episode of season 3. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.